Today we're going to be learning Yevamot Daf Kaf Daled. We're going to get into things a little bit different than normal. We do have a presentation today, but just for a very short part of today's Daf. The beginning will be more similar, and then we're going to get off into Yibum related items, but a little bit different than before. Even some non-related Yibum items, which are going to kind of be the topic till sort of we get to the end of this parak, which is actually coming up soon. So the first thing we want to just review very, very briefly, the very crazy case in the Mishnah yesterday, where we ended up with a case after we built, where we have two people who potentially did Kiddushin, betrothal, with the same two women. We don't know who actually betrothed who. Then each one has two brothers, each one dies, and the brothers have to do Yibum or Chalitza. The question is, who does what when, right? The final case we got to was the conclusion that, right, if it's both of them, they both have two brothers and they both died. So one brother's brother does Yibum does Chalitza to one of the women. The other brother's brother does Chalitza to the other woman. And then once each one is Chalitza from each brother, each one is kind of viewed separately as relates to the other brother. And then they can basically end up mute everybody. They can basically end up doing Yibum with the last one, right? So we basically have one does Chalitza with the different one from each brother's section, and then the last ones can come in and do Yibum. And if for some reason the first two did Chalitza, and then the last two come in in other words, the first only one brother's kids, remember we have Reuven and then he had Shimon and Levi. Shimon and Levi do Chalitza for him, and then come in Nadav's two brothers, Elazar and Avihu, or I don't remember exactly which one brothers were there, but the brothers of, right, these were all the sons of Aaron, which you'll see why they were chosen in a few minutes, but they come in and they marry her, even though they're not supposed to. One is supposed to do Chalitza, one is supposed to do Yibum, the marriage is okay. So yesterday we started with trying to infer from the very first part of each section, which was the fact that we give her a get, that the Kiddushin Shalom Surula Biyah, or Kiddushin, the Kiddushin that can't ever be consummated is actually Kiddushin, because in this case, he can't ever actually sleep with any of the women because he's potentially married to her sister, which is then forbidden. Maybe we would say that is valid, which would be strange because it's a big famous machloket Abai and Rava, which is way after the Mishnah, and it wouldn't make sense. They would argue over something that's so clear in the Mishnah. To which the Gemara said, we reshuffled the case. It's not a case where where it was a confusion from the beginning. It was only confusing after. I mean, the Kiddushin was done in a regular way. They knew exactly who they were betrothing. It only became confusing later. So, by the way, it makes sense also if you're talking about betrothal, it happens when the girl is still young, right? Betrothal just means she's designated to him. It doesn't mean she's married to him yet. So, it could be they did the betrothal much earlier about one of their kids, and then they didn't remember which one because they don't live together after the betrothal. In any case, they said, well, if that's the case, why is the Mishnah, what's the chidush here? And then they said, right, isn't it obvious? And then they basically said why it's not obvious in all the cases. Now we get to 4 lines from the bottom of Kaf Gimel Amud Bet where we left off. Lizeshnayim ulizeshnayim. Right? That was the third section of the Mishnah, right? The later cases, if they both have two brothers, which I explained when we started today's class, they say again, hatulam alihainu hach. Everything in that case is just built on the previous case. So again, why are you mentioning this? So they say, well, you might have thought that maybe we don't let the brothers do Yibum, the second ones in each set, right? The second brother in each set after the first two did Chalitza. So the second brother is allowed to do Yibum. Well, they say, well, maybe you would have thought, maybe we don't allow you to do Yibum because maybe the other brother, the first one, might think that you could do Yibum as well. Kamash malan, that there's no reason to make that gezerah. Okay, and that's what it's coming to teach you, that really the second ones can come and do Yibum. Now they ask a very important question, which is, how is this different from a Mishnah that we've already seen, which is actually really a Mishnah in the beginning of the third parak, which we're going to get to on Daf Kavav. We're almost there. How is it different from that case? And it's a case we've seen before. I didn't put it in the presentation, but if you really want to see the presentation on it, you can find it in Daf Tet. It comes up on page Tet. And we had it, I think it was Tet and Yud Chet. It comes up in Yud Chet. Right. I thought it was also in Tet, but in any case, it's definitely in Yud Chet. You can find it there, maybe even in Tet. It says in the Mishnah, and we'll get to it on Kavav, and there also there'll be charts on it. Okay, it's a pretty simple case. That's why I didn't bother bringing the images of it. 4 brothers. 2 of them are married to 2 sisters. So Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. Reuven and Shimon are married to Rachel and Leah. So Shimon and Levi, Reuven and Shimon died. The first 2 brothers who were married died. Now what happens? Leah and Rivka, 2 sisters, fall to Yibum to 2 brothers. What's the problem? Remember this? Each brother has Zika, at least according to the first explanation. We'll get to the second explanation in a minute, but let's go with the basic. We're assuming there's Zika. Remember what that means? That means when you fall to Yibum to somebody, you're basically already connected to them almost through a marriage relationship, even though you're not yet. If you hold that way, then each brother has Zika to 2 sisters. Each brother theoretically is supposed to marry 2 sisters, even though he has another brother to do it. Each one independently has Zika, which means it's as if they're married to 2 sisters, which means they can't do Yibum. So they do Chalitza. Okay, they can't do Yibum at all. Now, there's 2 differences between this and our Mishnah in terms of the law. In our case, we allow Yibum to the second brother. So why don't we just say there, let Levi do Chalitza to Rachel. That breaks her connection to Yehuda. And then Yehuda could come in, just like in our Mishnah, and do Yibum to the second one, to Leah. That should work. So why don't we say that there? And furthermore, if in that case, they both married, they each took a wife and just married her, like in our Mishnah, they would have to get divorced. So why is that different from our case? So there's a big difference between that and our case. Hachi hashta, what? Are those comparable? Hatam ilaman damar yesh zika. First of all, if you say zika, there's zika. Now in our case, there isn't definite zika. Each case is a doubt whether she's married. We don't really know who she's married to. Maybe she is, and then you're marrying a chotzku kato, right? The wife, the sister who's actually supposed to be marrying you, but maybe not. So there, either there's zika or ilaman damar. If you remember, there was a second explanation. If you hold there's no zika, how do you explain that Mishnah? Remember, there's a big debate. Do we view that there's zika and they're connected, or are they not connected until they actually do yibum? So, ilaman damar asur levatel mitzvah yivamim, asur levatel mitzvah yivamim. In other words, either it's because there's zika and then there's zika, or you can't cancel out the mitzvah of yivamim. What does that mean? That means, if you remember, this is the warrior case. What if scenario? If Levi is to do yibum with Rachel, what if Yehuda dies before he does yibum? Then Leah ends up becoming exempt from Yibum because she falls to an Isur Erva. She falls to Levi. He's the only one left. And Levi can't marry her because he's already married to her sister. So she becomes exempt, and then we don't actually fulfill the mitzvah of Yibum there. So that's another potential problem there. But in our case, each one in our case could say, well, maybe he really wasn't married to my sister. And maybe there was no zika because maybe it was me he was betrothed to and not my sister. So of course he could do yibum with me. In other words, here, and it can be said much simpler, which is it's all a case of doubt. So because it's a case of doubt, it might be a problem, but it might not be. So that's why we allow yibum to the second one. Once we deal with the first problem, we can then do yibum to the second. And if they do go ahead and get married, well, then we can say we just leave it because at this point, there's no zika anyway. And it's only one of them in any case had to do yibum, so it's not really such an issue. Next part, kadmu v'kinsue motziim, Tana Sheila. So Sheila brings a braita now and says, afilish nehem kohanim. This is why the example of Nadav and the brothers of all the sons of Aaron was a great example. Even if they're kohanim, they can still do this. Now, what's the problem? A kohen is not allowed to marry a divorcee. Also can't marry a chalutza, a woman who underwent chalitza. Now, remember what happens in this case. If you have 2 sets of brothers, the first set, which we have was Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. So Shimon and Levi come in. Shimon does chalitza to one, and then one of Nadav's brothers, Avihu, let's say, does chalitza to another. And then we have 2 more brothers left, one Levi and one Elazar or Itamar. I think it was Elazar in that example. So now each one can do yibum to, right? Each one was chalutza already, though. Each one did chalitza. So now it turns out the Kohen is going to end up going in with a chalutza. Now, is she really a chalutza or not? Well, what's the issue? We don't know. The first brother, when Reuven's brother did chalitza to her, Maybe she was betrothed to Reuven, in which case it was chalitza. Maybe she wasn't, in which case it's not chalitza. So it's safek chalitza. Maybe she's a chalutza, maybe she's not, right? Chalitza is the action. Chalutza is what you define a woman who underwent chalitza. So comes Sheila and he says, even if they're both Kohanim. So now the Gemara asks my time, what's the reason? Chalutza de Rabbanani. First of all, the fact that a Kohen can't marry a woman who's a chalutza is only de Rabbanan. How do we know that? Because it doesn't say so in the Torah. In the Torah it says, I'll read you the pasuk, Isha zona v'chalala, a prostitute or a chalala who's a woman born from an improper relationship between a Kohen and one of these women, lo yikachu, v'isha gerusha me'isha lo yikachu, and a woman divorced from her husband, you can't marry. It doesn't say chalutza there. So it's only de Rabbanan. In our case, safek chalutza lo gazru b'Rabbanan. Right? We didn't make a gzera on a case of doubt. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute, chalutza de Rabbanan, where do you get the fact that this is rabbinic? It says, there's a braita, Hatanya, that says, Grusha emi ala grusha. Right? Because it says divorce in the pasuk, we get, okay, divorce. But chalutza minayim, where do you get a chalutza from? Talmud lomar, ve'isha, because it says, and a woman, from there you get the end, isha grusha, that teaches you also the chalutza. So what do you see? It's Torah law because it's derived straight from a verse. We know this to be the case. Many times they'll say, oh, it's derived from a verse, it's doraita. And then the Gemara answers, no. Mi de Rabbanan, who it's really rabbinic. Ukras machtabamu, they just connected to the verse so that you remember that there's someone additional. Oh, there's a va, it adds someone additional. Who does it add? A chalutza. That's how you'll remember it. It's a good mnemonic device, but it's not really from the Torah. And that's why we say, even Kohanim in this case can do yibum or marry this woman who is potentially had chalitza from the other person. Okay. This, by the way, before we go on to the next Mishnah, we're basically done now. I just wanted to mention, because it seems like a crazy case, but the rabbis love safek cases. Okay, we're going to see this many, many times in the Gemara. All sorts of cases of doubt. This is like a great case of doubt because we have two women. They were each betrothed by one man. We don't know which man. And then we end up with two brothers for each or one brother, right? They love kind of finagling these safek situations because it really gets at the crux of what all the issues are. This is a good review of a chotz kukato, of chalutza, not marrying a Kohen, right? We get to a whole bunch of issues by raising these, presumably ridiculous cases that probably never really happened, but it's a good exercise in getting to the ideas behind everything. Okay, new Mishnah. Mitzvah begadol yabem, v'im kadam katan zacha. Now we finally get to, okay, how do you do yibum? I know these questions were asked on day one, right? Who does yibum? How do we know which brother? You have 10 brothers. Who's the one who's supposed to do it? Here they give you a formula, okay? The mitzvah is on the oldest. If the younger one did it, it works. It's not like it's a must, but it's better to have the older one do it. Where are we going to get this from? We're going to bring a braita right away that darshans it. And from there, we're going to get into 4 different drashot on the pasuk. Only really one of them is the relevant one for our purposes. And then we're going to get off a little bit on a tangent first into one of them. And then we'll deal much more with the firstborn doing it and all sorts of questions on this drasha, like why didn't we darshan it a little bit differently? So here starts our braita. Tanu Rabbanan. Before we get there, I want to read 2 verses in the Torah because it's very important before we darshan them to understand. So our chapter with Yibum is in Dvarim chapter 25. We're going to read verses 5 and 6. Ki yeshvu achim yachdav, this should be familiar already. When brothers sit together, umet echad mehem, and one of them dies. These words are going to be important soon, so keep them in mind. Uben ein lo, okay, the rest of this is not so important for our purposes, but this is important just in Yibum in general. He doesn't have a child, right? A son, but it really means a child. Lo tia eshet hamet hachutza lishzar, the woman can't just marry anybody, the wife, the widow, Yevamot yavo alea, needs to have relations with her, ulekachalu lishan, he takes her to be a wife, v'yibma. Okay, we already darshan that a bunch of times. Next pasuk says, assuming they do yibum, v'haya habachor asher teled yakum al shem achiv hamet. So the firstborn, pay attention, who's the firstborn here? The son. The firstborn son that's going to be born from the union of the brother and the widow. Yakum al shem achiv hamet. He will be, literally this means he'll be named for the brother, right? He'll continue his legacy. And his name won't be wiped out. The simple reading seems to say, and we'll see this in the Gemara, seems to say If his name, the Gemara is going to give an example, if his name was Yosef, you call the son Yosef. Okay, if the guy who died was Yosef, his son gets called in his name, and that way his name continues, right? Nowadays, we'd say more like the last name continues your legacy, not necessarily your first name, but seems like you get the name of your father who died. So now the Gemara is going to do a very strange drasha, because the word Bechor was referring to the son that's born from this new union. But Tanu Rabbanan v'haya Bechor mikan shemitzvah b'gadol liyabem. They take this totally out of context, and they say the Bechor shows you the firstborn is the one who needs to do Yibum. How do they get to that? Definitely is not the simple reading. That's why I read you the pasuk before, because the pasuk before says, Yevamot yavo aleha ulekachalo liisha b'yibma. He does Yibum to her, and if you forget about that, there's an end pasuk there, and you just continue v'haya Bechor, and the one who should do this should be a Bechor. Okay, that's how they read it. They basically entirely take it out of context and say the Bechor mentioned here is the Bechor, basically the brother who's doing Yibum and not the son that's born. So that's the drasha. Mikan shemitzvah b'gadol liyabem. That's how we learn that the oldest one has to do Yibum. So later the Gemara is going to say, why oldest one? It should be the Bechor. What if there's no Bechor? Maybe there's no Yibum. They're going to suggest a whole bunch of things. If you're going to learn it really from Bechor, we have a whole slew of questions. Why didn't you do this, that, or the other thing? It's going to be a long section coming up. But first, we're going to finish with this Braita. And then we'll have one other question on the Braita before we get back to the Bechor. Asher Teled, that will be born, well, Praila Ilonit, Shein Yoled. This is where we learned already that an Ilonit, someone who has no signs of puberty whatsoever. Again, this isn't just any woman who can't have children. It's a specific type. So this Ilonit is exempt from Yibum. Yakum al Shem Achiv, Linachala. That means, Yakum al Shem Achiv, not the way I explained it. It means that you inherit your brother. If you do Yibum, you get all of his possessions. So the Braita continues and asks a question on this. Ataomer, it's kind of like taking a break in the drasha and the pasuk, because later we'll get back to the last part of the verse. But now the Braita is saying, wait a minute. Ataomer lenachala eino ela l'shem. Why are you saying it means nachala? Maybe it means the name. Yosef, korim oto Yosef. Yochanan, korim oto Yochanan, right? Whatever his name was, that's the name you name the child. Ne'amal kan, so now they say, it's not that. That's the simple reading. But we have a Gzera Shava that takes it out of the simple reading. Ne'amal kan, it says here, Yakum al Shem Achiv. V'ne'amar lahalan, second time we go back to the Yosef story. By Yosef, it says, when Yaakov is blessing Ephraim and Menashe, he says to like the sons of Yosef, he says to Yosef, Al Shem Achehem Yikaru B'Nachalatam. If you have, the beginning of the verses, if you have other children that are born, they're not going to get their own portion in the land. Ephraim and Menashe each get their own portion, right? Which is an exception to the rule, because everyone else just gets one, and Yosef ends up with two portions. But any other sons that you have are going to be included in Ephraim and Menashe. They're not going to get their own portion. But what do you see here? Shem, Achehem, Yikaru, the same words, okay, right? Calling in the name of brothers. And then it says, B'Nachalatam. It's talking about nachala, it's talking about inheritance. So from there, Mashem ha'amor lahala nachala, just like there, the name is related to the nachala, the inheritance, av shem ha'amor kan nachala. So again, shem here must be nachala. And again, they take the pasuk out of context and teach something else based on Gzera Shava. Right? Before, the Bechor wasn't Gzera Shava, it was just a limud that we're taking it out of context. And there it's because they connected it with previous verses. By the way, they do sometimes, right? Sometimes they either connect it to a previous verse and punctuate it differently than the tradition has it punctuated to darshan. Sometimes it's even just punctuation within the verse, right? Where it's clear that you break here and they break differently in order to darshan something. So now going back to the pasuk, the last part of that verse, we're still in the Braita that we started. Here we say a man who's castrated his name is wiped out, meaning he can never have children. So he's also exempt from Yibum. Amarav. So now let's go back. Before we get to Bechor, we're going to deal with this Nachala drasha. So now we finish the Braita. Rava comes and comments. He says, listen, in looking at this Braita, I want to tell you something basic. In general, we don't take a pasuk out of its context, meaning even if we have a drasha, we keep the pasuk in its regular reading normally. But in this case, this pasuk came in, he's talking specifically, at least it seems, there's a bit of a machloka, but it seems he's talking about the name. The name, because of the Gzera Shava of Karesha Machiv and all that, they take the pasuk entirely out of context. It doesn't mean his name, it means you get his possessions. Now the Gemara asks, wait a minute, if it weren't for Gzera Shava, Hava mina shem mamash. You want to say that it really meant without the Gzera Shava, this means he will be called in the name of, now here's the tricky part. Yikareh al Shem, maybe you didn't notice this before. Okay, sometimes it's a good example of if I read something quickly, you might not pay attention. Yikareh al Shem Achiv. What should it have said? Yikareh al Shem Aviv, right? Brother of who? Right? What are we talking about? So they say like this. Now, maybe it's the brother of the Yabam. Okay, so now, right? So listen, there's a problem with that. Leman kamazar Rachmana. Who's the pasuk addressing when it says his brother? So obviously it must be addressing the Yabam, right? The one who does Yibum. Liyabam, there's a problem then. If it's to the Yabam, Yakum Hashem achicha mebaile. Okay, right? It should say, right? Yivama yavo alel l'kalu lishav yibma, and then vaya b'chor asher teled Yakum Hashem achicha hamet. In other words, if it's addressing now, you can argue with this, but they say if it's addressing the Yabam, then it should have said achicha, your brother. Beidina, if it's talking to the court, saying the court has to make sure that Yakum Hashem achiv, that it will be on his brother's name. Well, Yakum Hashem achi aviv mebaile. It should be the court is addressing the child. The child should be named based on his uncle's name. So they say, no, don't worry about this. This is how we read it. It's the court talking to the Beit Din and saying, speak to the Yabam and make sure he takes care to call the son in the name of his brother. Okay, and that's how we get this word, the brother. Yakum Hashem achiv is the Beit Din coming in and basically ensuring that the child is named based on, because who's naming the child? The father. So make sure to the father that it's in the name of his brother. And therefore, that would have been the simple reading and comes back full circle to explain Rava. And in that case, comes the Gzera Shava and removes this entirely. And Yakum Hashem achiv means the Yabam gets the Nachala of his brother. Okay, as opposed to the child is named in the name of. Right? You have to understand the context here. It sounds like Yakum Hashem achiv is the subject is the son. That's why the achiv makes no sense. Right? He's not going to be called by the name of his brother. And that's why they struggle a little bit with the verse. Now we're really back to the key part of our sugya, which is this Bechor, because that's what the Mishnah was talking about, right? We got sidetracked because they brought a brayta that showed the source. And from that, we learned some other things. But our real topic was this Bechor drasha. So the Gemara says, if you're going to say that Bechor is not talking about the simple reading, which is the child that's born, but it's talking about the one who does Yibum, what's it telling you then? Why wouldn't you just say you only do Yibum with the Bechor? You can't do Yibum with a younger child. Only the oldest brother does Yibum. So they say there's an obvious proof that that's not the case, because remember, we had this whole thing many times. Remember, we said there's a special drasha, Yachdav, that teaches you that if there was a brother born later after the death of the first brother, then there's no Yibum. Now, if you say the mitzvah of Yibum is only in the firstborn, there can't possibly be a scenario where a younger child would be born later and we would think he'd be obligated in Yibum. Of course, he's not obligated in Yibum. He wasn't the Bechor. So it's obvious that you can't say that. So then they say, wait, maybe you could still. Parich Rav Acha, now here comes our one little presentation for today. Rav Acha comes and says, wait a minute. Maybe you would say, okay, now here Rachel and Leah become very relevant, that we use them as examples. Maybe you would think that it has to be a Bechor. Now, Yibum goes by the father, but maybe the Bechor could be a Bechor to the mother, right? Maybe there's just something unique about a Bechor that allows him to do Yibum. So let's say, here we have Yaakov and Leah. They have a son named Reuven. Okay, this is like our story in the Tanakh. And then Reuven dies. He's married to Yael. Yael has to do Yibum with one of Reuven's brothers. Let's say he doesn't have any brothers. And then afterwards, Yosef is born. Now, Yosef is Rachel's oldest child. He is a Bechor. So maybe he would fit the rule. However, he's exempt because he's Esh Tachiv, right? She, Yael, to him is Esh Tachiv Shelo Haya B'olamo. She's the wife of someone who he wasn't alive when Reuven was there. And maybe that's what it's coming to exclude, but yet you could still say only Bechors can do Yibum. So, and in this case, you wouldn't even need that Reuven doesn't have any brothers. Even if Reuven had tons of other brothers. None of them would be able to do it, only Yosef. And comes the Torah to teach you, no, Yosef can't, because he was not around when Reuven died. Okay, and that would be coming to teach you that. So maybe you would think that's Buchra de'ima, the Bechor to his mother. Maybe that would be coming to exempt that case. No, Aula Matzit Amit, there's no way you would have said that, because Yibum b'Nachala Talya Rachman. Yibum is all connected to Nachala. We talked about that before, right? This is one of these things that also pervades throughout the Masechet. The Yibum and Nachala are intertwined. We just saw that from the Drasha. And therefore, Nachala Mena'av Lo Mena'im, there's no significance to a Bechor from a mother, so you wouldn't have thought that would be the case, and you don't need Eshachiv Shalo Haya Ba'olamo to exclude Bechor Mena'ima. Therefore, it's obvious that it's not only a Bechor who does Yibum because of that exemption. You wouldn't need any reason to exempt that. He would never even come up for Yibum because he's not the Bechor, he's not the oldest. And you can't say Bechor ben Ima because there's no such significance to that. Next suggestion. Ve'ema ki'ika Bechor titkayem mitzvah Yibum. Ki'leika Bechor lo titkayem mitzvah Yibum. Maybe it's saying when there's a firstborn, then you do the mitzvah of Yibum. When there's no firstborn, you don't do the mitzvah of Yibum. Like, let's say it was Reuven and Shimon and Levi, brothers. Reuven dies. Shimon's the one who's who dies without children. But Reuven happens to have already been dead. So there's no Bechor. So therefore, maybe you would say, maybe there's no mitzvah of Yibum. The Yibum can only happen when there's a Bechor. Not that the Bechor has to do it, but only when there's a Bechor. So they say it can't possibly be. And by the way, it could mean if Reuven dies without children, well, then there's no Bechor either, right? That's another possibility. If the Bechor dies, maybe there's no mitzvah of Yibum. So Amar Kra, right? The mitzvah of Yibum would only be if Reuven's still alive. So they say no, because Amar Kra umet achad mehen milo askinan demet Bechor. It says in the pasuk if any one of them died, which means it could be Reuven's the one who died, and if Reuven's the one who died, then there is Yibum according to the pasuk. So you can't say it's only when there's a Bechor. Ve'ema. By the way, I charted all these possibilities out so you can kind of see it in a chart form. Maybe you'll say ki leika Bechor kadam katan zacha, vi'ika Bechor kadam katan lo zacha. Remember what the Mishnah said. The mitzvah is bigadol, the oldest, but if the child, the younger one, goes ahead and does Yibum first before anyone has a chance, it works. Maybe that only works when there is no Bechor, but maybe when there is a firstborn around, the firstborn has to do it, and if the younger one does it, it's invalid. Amar Kra, no, because the pasuk says ki yeshvu achim yachdav, which means, right, and those are the achim who get to do Yibum, hu ksha yeshivat achim zelazeh. It says when the brothers sit together, right, meaning they were alive together and all that, any one of them can do Yibum, right? It says, and one of them dies. Could be anyone. It means that it's all the same. Maybe there's two tracks. One track is there's a Bechor, in which case it's the Bechor who does it. Second track is there's no Bechor in the family. Let's say the Bechor is the one who died. Then it doesn't matter who does it. There's no order. So the Mishnah, let's say where it says the mitzvah is bigadol, is only if there's a Bechor. So in other words, again, what are they trying to do in all these drashot? To say why specifically Bechor? Why that word should connote something more. But then each time they prove no. And if you say that that's the case, then alama tane Abaye Kashisha. Why does Abaye Kashisha say mitzvah bigadol liyabem lo ratza ochim etzel achiv katan lo ratza chozrim etzel gadol? Why does it say then that the mitzvah is with the oldest? If he doesn't, then you go to the next in line. And if not the next in line, it doesn't exactly say this, but this is how they read it, because it doesn't give you a number of possibilities. But it basically means you always start with the oldest and you go down the line. If you went down the line and there's, let's say, 10 brothers and nobody's interested in doing Yibum, then you go back to the first one and the Beit Din forces him to at least do Chalitza if he doesn't want to do Yibum, right? But they probably try to encourage him to do Yibum in the days when they thought Yibum was better. And if not, he could do Chalitza. But then they go back to the oldest. So it seems very clear here that there's an order, and it says bigadol, it doesn't say bibechol, which means even if there's no bechor, you still start with the oldest. So they say kibechol. They say because the gadol is treated like the eldest. Ma bechor becholato garmalo, af gadol gedulato garmalo. Right? That's why this is the case, because it doesn't have to do, and now you see that they viewed Bechor as a unique status, not just as oldest, but in the end, they say, in the end, what is he really? He's the oldest. It's just, He's got a special name to him, but there's no unique significance to there being a Bechor. It's all about the oldest. Whoever's the oldest at the time, even if the Bechor is dead, it's all the same. Ve'ema, how about this suggestion? Maybe there are still two tracks, but still it goes from oldest to youngest. But maybe there's one difference when there's a Bechor. Ema kimiya ben Bechor lishkol nachala. Kimiya ben pashut lo lishkol nachala. Pashut, by the way, is always a word for a non-Bechor child, a regular child. Just like Hedyot, Kohen Gadol. So in the language of Bechor and brothers, it's Bechor and Pashut. So maybe only if it's a Bechor does he get the Nachala, because the pasuk says, Bechor asher tele, right? Yakum al shem achi. So maybe the whole Nachala thing is only when there's a Bechor. And otherwise, you would marry the woman, but you wouldn't get to inherit all of his stuff, right? It would be split equally among all the brothers. So Amar Kra, Yakum al shem achi, Varekam. No, it's whoever does it. That's the one who continued, right? That's the one who gets to whoever does Yibum. It doesn't matter if it was a younger one. He obviously gets the Nachala because that's what it says. Ve'ela. So now we basically suggested all sorts of crazy suggestions. Since the Torah uses specifically the word Bechor, we could have learned all sorts of things and we don't. So in the end, the real big question is, why did it use the word Bechor and not Gadol? Okay. So Ela Bechor Dekarya Rachmana Lamali Lamai Hilchata. For what halacha is this mentioned? For what significance does it have? Ligriuta. What does this mean? It's to show that it's actually a weakness. Okay, there's something not good about Bechor. What is it? Ma Bechor eno notel b'ra'oi k'b'muchzak. Af hai eno notel b'ra'oi k'b'muchzak. They bring up a totally different halacha. Another halacha about a Bechor is when a Bechor inherits his father, the firstborn, he gets double portion. But the question is, what does he get double portion of? The father's possessions are divided into two. There's items that are in the father's possession that are in his property at the time. And there's things that people owe him. Okay, so muchzak is what he's holding in his hand or in his property, in his possession. Ra'oi is money that's supposed to be coming to him, right? Like if you balance your bank account, right? So there's money that's there and then there's money that's either coming in or going out, right? So muchzak is what he has and ra'oi is what's coming in. Okay, I loaned out money to someone, it's supposed to be coming back to me. That would be ra'ui. You don't get pishnayim. The Bechor doesn't get double portion of the stuff that's owed. He only gets double portion of what's in existence at the time in the father's property. So just like that, that's what we learn about Bechor. This word Bechor is coming to tell you that when the first, and that's number one, it tells you it's the oldest and whoever's oldest at the time, and that's the importance of the order. We always go in order. We try to have the oldest one do Yibum. Again, it doesn't have to be that way, but that's the ideal, because if the younger one did it, we already learned in the Mishnah, it works. But to use the language of Bechor instead of Gadol to teach you this halacha, that when he inherits his brother, whoever does Yibum, he doesn't inherit the parts that are coming in, right? And that stuff will be divided equally among all the brothers, anything that the brother is owed. And that's a side halacha. Okay. Now we get to an interesting topic. Just going to pervade also through tomorrow's daf, and at least get off a little bit on a bit of a different track on it. But now we're really off topic of Yibum, and we get to something really, really interesting, which is, okay, the subject here is rumors right now. So we have a case. We have a man who's suspected, okay, there's rumors going around that he slept with a shipcha Knaanit, which we know is forbidden. And then nishtachrera, then she becomes freed by her master, which means she's now Jewish fully, and he could potentially marry her. Oh, or there's rumors spread, we haven't yet gotten to the halacha, or ovedet kochavim, he's suspected he slept with a Gentile woman, vinit gaira, and then she converts, hareze lo yichnos, he cannot marry her, because it's going to look like, right, the rumors are going to, if you marry someone who people think you already have slept with before, and then you will go ahead and marry her after she gets freed, right? After, in each case, she gets freed or she converts, she becomes Jewish, people are going to say, oh, I guess it was true that he was sleeping with her before. So we don't allow you to get married. But v'im kanas, if he didn't ask our opinion, and he just did it anyway, okay, maybe it's similar, it's brought up here because of the last Mishnah, where if they did it, even though they weren't supposed to, we don't make them get divorced. Hanit anal eshet ish. Someone is suspected of sleeping with a married woman, adultery. They're suspected of adultery. And they make her divorce her first husband, which is what they do when someone's adulterous. In this case, If the person who is suspected of having slept with her, had adultery with her, then marries her, we force him to divorce her. Now, the big question of this, and we're going to start with it today, later on in today's daf, is what's the case here? Is it just a rumor? Based on a rumor, we're going to make her get divorced from her husband and she can't marry the other guy? Or were there witnesses here? Okay, because here, obviously, the halacha is stricter because we actually make her get divorced. So the question is, were there witnesses or not? So we'll get back to that question. I just didn't want to not address it because it begs the question when you're reading it. Was it just a rumor? And based on a rumor, we make her divorce from her husband and we make, right? People spread rumors all the time and who knows if they're really true. So the Gemara first starts off with this Gioret case and it has a big question. And when I read you this next source, don't worry, because I'll already tell you in advance, so you don't get nervous. We don't paskin this way, okay? So it's a very relevant topic, very relevant, very much so in our day and age, probably less so in earlier generations. Ha-Gioret miahavya. So now they say it's obvious from here that if this Ovedet Kochavim was suspected of having relations with this Jewish man, and then converted, why did she convert? Presumably to marry him, right? So it sounds like if you convert in order to get married to a Jewish man, your conversion is valid. Now, Uriminu, that contradicts the following source. If a man converts, right? Doesn't matter man or woman. If a man converts in order to marry a woman, if you convert for marriage purposes only, you don't really want to be Jewish, it's just you want to get married. If you convert to sit at the king's table, right? The king will have you sit at his table if you're Jewish, or you want to be part of the Avadim of Shlomo. This is obviously just an example because there's no Avadim of Shlomo anymore, but they're saying if, right, in the time of Shlomo, there was such plentiful, everybody wanted to be one of his servants and you can only be if you were Jewish. So, you converted for that purpose. Enam gerim divrei Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Nechemia says we do not accept them as gerim. Shaya Rabbi Nechemia Omer, he would say, Echad gerei arayot. This is a clear reference to the Shomronim, the Kutim. Remember we talked about them, that they were brought to the city of Shomron when they did the Assyrians, mixed up everybody. And when they were in the city of Shomron, which was the capital city of the Israelite kingdom at the time, right? They were no longer there anymore. But these lions came and ate up and were attacking the people because they weren't keeping the mitzvot of the land. They went and they found a Kohen who taught them the rules and they started keeping Judaism because they were scared of these lions. So he said, that's not a true conversion. If you say, I had a dream and someone came to me in a dream and told me I have to convert, also not. In the time of Mordechai and Esther, remember the Megillah tells us, Kulam, right? There were many people who mityahadim. Right? This is like when you go with the winning team, right? Because things were good for the Jews, so they decided, let's just become Jewish. Einam gerim, and this is a very interesting line, unless they convert nowadays. What does that mean? What are you talking about? Nowadays, things are not good for the Jews. So if you were to convert now would be the ideal time, right? If you think about it, this is super, super relevant right now because many people are fleeing Ukraine, coming to Israel. They want to convert so that they can have citizenship here, right? Some of them have legitimate motivations and they really have wanted to make Aliyah for a long time. And this was just an opportunity. And some of them are looking to be protected here. So, right, that's like the question, can we accept them as converts or not? So Rabbi Nechemia was very clear. People who are coming with ulterior motives, right? And when things are good for the Jews and things are not good in other places, and obviously there were piguim recently, it's not like it's the most safe place, but yes, it's clearly safer than there. Anyway, now they say, don't worry about that source. That doesn't contradict our Mishnah because we don't paskin like Rabbi Nechemia. We say all these people are converts. You convert because you want to get married. You can convert, right? These are all legitimate reasons to convert to Judaism. Even when things are good for the Jews, it's all fine. You can convert. If you want to convert, come convert, okay? It's very interesting to see these different approaches, right? Okay, and if you notice that the little gimel, if you have a regular Gemara in front of you, which always shows you where we paskin halacha, or usually, is on this one, that we do accept people as gerim if they want to convert to marry, if they want to convert because, the refugee issue is more of an issue of the state of Israel and how many people we want to really accept. And here we know the rules are very strict about who can convert there. It's not so simple. It was a great case. My husband's dealing with this on a daily basis in his work team. So there was a case of, this is like a great, there's a case of a people who came from the Ukraine and they converted already to Judaism. But the rules are that in order to make aliyah, you have to be in your place where you live for 9 months in your city after you convert, because they don't want people just trying to convert just so they can become citizens. So these people fled the Ukraine because of the war. So they were only there for 2 months. So the state of Israel said, well, you weren't there for 9 months. So sorry, we can't accept you, which is obviously ridiculous because they couldn't be there for 9 months because they had to leave. So anyway, these are the issues that come up here that are very relevant. Okay, next. So now we've resolved that. So they say, wait a minute, if they can convert, so then what's the problem in our Mishnah? If she can convert to marry him, so why don't we let them get married, right? The problem number one is if she converted to marry him, right? It seems like she did convert and her conversion is valid, but the problem is, why can't she marry him? Well, that's because of what we already said. Here, there's a separate problem. To convert to get married is one thing, but if you were suspected of having been living with her before, right, then we're worried of this issue. You don't want all those rumors to be confirmed as true. In other words, you don't want to, if you marry this woman who you were suspected of having been with her before, that's more of a problem here because you're basically confirming rumors about you. And we don't want to allow rumors to kind of get spread. That's a bad thing. So that's the issue. But that's why if he does marry her, the marriage is valid. It's not, right? It's not such a big deal. This is also very interesting because there's many people who convert and they've been living together. So generally they try to avoid asking questions about this. And, when you come to get married, they kind of overlook this issue because otherwise it would really be a big issue. Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, here's this brighter that seems to be going like Rabbi Nechemia, which is you can't accept gerim in the time of the Mashiach. Kayotzebo, lo kiblu gerim, lo b'yimei David, v'lo b'yimei Shlomo. Okay, they didn't accept, they talk about these times as if they were idyllic. I wonder if at the time they thought they were idyllic, but now people say, right, those were the ideal times for the Jews, time of David and the time of Shlomo, and therefore they didn't accept converts at all. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Maikha, what's the verse? Where do you get this from? And here there's a bunch of different ways to interpret this verse according to this interpretation. I'll go with one of them. Hein gor yagol efes moti. Gor yagor milashon yitgayer, meaning you can come and convert. Efes moti, when there's nothing to convert for, meaning things are not good. And if so, mi garitcha, who's going to be a ger with you? Right? And who's going to go with you? Alayach yipol. In other words, whoever goes with you when things are not good for the Jews, alayach yipol will end up going with you to olam haba. In other words, they'll get a place in the world to come. Aval idach lo. Okay, but other people, no. Okay, only if times are bad and not if times are good for the Jews. Hanit'an al eshet ish. Now we're going to go back to the real issue about this married woman. So amarav ube'edim. Rav says this whole mission is talking about when there were witnesses who witnessed that they actually had relations together. Amar Rav Sheshet, and this is a great line of Rav Sheshet, and it comes up this kind of line in a bunch of places, and you think about the fact that Rav Sheshet saying this about Rav, who is one of the greatest Amoraim. He says, Amina, I say, Kinayim v'shachiv Rav, Amar l'hayshmatah. He must have said this when he was half asleep. There's no way he really meant what he said. It's impossible. Okay, basically a way of knocking out what he said. But I guess it's a little, lizalzel. It's not exactly the nicest thing. On the other hand, maybe he's trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe you were not 100% when you said it, because if you were, you never would have said this. Why? Detanya, because it says in a Braita. Again, the same kind of thing. You're suspected of being with a married woman and they make you divorce al yado. Okay, let's say Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, let's just assume they're not brothers in this case. So a woman marries Reuven, then she's suspected of having slept with Shimon, and then she gets divorced from Reuven. They force her to, right? She gets divorced from Reuven because she was suspected. Then she goes and marries Levi. She doesn't marry Shimon. And then she gets divorced from Shimon. That means she got divorced from someone else in the interim. And then she wants to marry Shimon. So im kanas lo yotzi. If Shimon marries her at that point, it's okay. Which sounds like it's not okay previously, right? So, which is our Mishnah. Meaning, if she marries Shimon directly, it wouldn't work. So, hechidami, what's the case? Ika Adim, right? Which is what Rav said. If there's witnesses, there's no way they'd allow her to marry Shimon, even though she was married to Levi in the interim, right? The idea of her being married to Levi in the interim basically means maybe the rumor wasn't true. Because I'm sorry, if Levi, right? If she's married to Levi in the interim, maybe the rumor was Shimon isn't true, because otherwise she would have married Shimon right away. So if she married someone in the interim, we allow her to stay married to Shimon. We don't allow her to marry him, but we do allow her to stay married to Shimon. So if there's witnesses, what does it help that she was with Levi? We have witnesses that she slept with Shimon. She's never, for the rest of her life, not allowed to marry Shimon. So elalav deleka edi. It must be there weren't edim, in which case we're going to say, Rav, you're wrong. It must be there's no edim. And then we'll work that right in with us. Tamad ata acher, the ifske lakala. Kala means the rumor. Because someone else came in the middle and broke the rumor, that's why she could stay married. But halav hachi mafkina. But if not, it would be our Mishnah, and we make her get divorced. So Amar l'cha Rav could answer like this. No, hu adin da'afagav delo ate acher ba'afskala kala. Could be nobody came and broke the rumor. If there's witnesses, then we make her get divorced. If there's no witnesses, then we don't make her get divorced. And then the chiddush of that Mishnah is not that we don't make her get divorced because she was married to Levi. No, we never make her get divorced if it's just a rumor. But if there's witnesses, right? If there's witnesses, then if there are witnesses, even though the chiddush is, even though someone came in the middle, we still don't let her marry Shimon l'chatchila. It's only if she married Shimon after Levi that we allow it, but we don't let her marry Shimon, even if it's just rumors. That's what that Braita is saying. In which case, we can explain our Mishnah that's talking about when there were witnesses. Now we bring another contradiction. This is fascinating in terms of mamzerim and how rabbis try to limit mamzer. If she had kids from Ruvain, then we don't make her get divorced here from Ruvain. Why? Because otherwise then they'll say, oh, if you made her get divorced and then she can't marry Shimon, the whole idea is that it must be her kids, maybe or Shimon's, and people are going to say maybe these kids are mamzerim. So therefore, lo tetzeh, you don't make her get divorced. Unless there were witnesses. If there were witnesses, so now there's a difference, right? With children, without children. Without children, she gets divorced no matter what. With children, she only gets divorced if there's witnesses. So Rav, and then it's not a question, because you could say that Rav said there's Adim and children. And then we're going to say, even though she has children, since there's Adim, yes, okay? So now they say, wait, but there's a bunch of cases where we make her get divorced, like our Mishnah. So why? What motivated Rav? My ducha de Rav. Why did Rav have to say it was Adim? He could have said no Adim, but no children. If there's no Adim and no children, also she would have to get divorced. So why was Rav motivated? And it's all because of the witnesses. And it sounds like if there weren't witnesses, you wouldn't have to. You could have said, it's no Adim, but no children. And then we make you get divorced because what's the big deal now? Obviously, it's a big deal for the woman, but there are rumors and she obviously did something and therefore, right? And this is all a very interesting question. I don't have time to get into it, but about how seriously we take rumors. So I'm a rabbi, Manitin Kashite. What motivated me? Because the Mishnah, the wording of the Mishnah, it says Hotzi'uha. Hotzi'uha is always the language of the court. And how does the court do things? Only with testimony. And beitin be'edim hu demafke. Okay, that's one option. Ibait ema, and we'll stop here. Second option to understand Rav, it's really going to continue into tomorrow's stuff. So we'll finish here and we'll see another possible explanation of why Rav chose to go with that there's Adim. And right, even if she has children from the first marriage, we still force her because there were witnesses. If there weren't Adim, it would split into yes sons, no sons. The question is, why didn't Rav explain the Mishnah in that way? And that's our question that we have one answer for. Now we'll wait tomorrow to get to the second answer. Have a great day, everyone. Lots to think about this issue of rumors and how we treat them and how seriously where Rav kind of wanted to say, no, it's really witnesses and not just rumors. But we do see that rumors were significant in all sorts of ways here. Have a great day. Maybe it's also to remind you, you shouldn't listen to rumors. You shouldn't spread rumors, right? Because look what you could do to people's lives. Okay. With that thought, have a great day.